Hey, welcome back to the Black Brain Trust. This is episode 890, Black Tech Talk. I'm here with my guest, Ike.
Hey, how's it going, Mike V? Glad to be here.
I'm good, brother, and yourself?
I'm doing excellent. No complaints. We're already half the way through 2024. And yeah.
It's good to have you on, Ike. You and I have been trying to, facilitate, some content, for quite some time, really have some good discussions around STEM and other things like that. I have appeared on your Case Closed a couple of times, but I think this may be the first time you've had a one-on-one on the Black Brain Trust, right?
This is true. Yes, this is the first time on the Black Brain Trust. I've what on one-on-one that is, yes. I've hopped in and quote unquote chopped it up with you and Complex a couple of times, but yeah.
Yeah, definitely. These Black Tech Talks, I started doing these a couple of years ago, actually a lot longer than that, but I started doing these Black Tech Talks primarily because there was a need within the Black manosphere, to have a discussion around more deeper conversations about tech and just engineering or STEM as a general topic, and so what I want to get into today is kind of get an understanding as to how did you get into engineering, and what kind of engineering are you into?
Great questions. So from early on, I realized that I liked physics, right? And it was kind of an interesting story because I was not necessarily good at math for certain reasons until I figured it out later in college. But I just knew I liked physics from a young age. Actually, you know what? There was a book on electromagnetism and stuff like that. So I was probably like 5 or 6 or whatever. But the fact that you could comb your hair, right? And then pick up, basically comb your hair and basically charge the comb, if you will, and then pick up a piece of paper through, the electromagnetic whatever. That just blew my mind, right? At an early age. And so I knew I liked physics and also liked art. Like I like to draw and I do a little bit of music and stuff like that. So I was like, maybe I can go into this kind of architecture thing. But generally speaking, by 8th grade in the Nigerian school system, you're going to figure out whether you're going to go into arts, sciences, or basically social sciences, right? It kind of segregates out at that point. So I was like, okay, I want to go into sciences. I think I can cut it, even though I'm struggling with math. And I think that I still have a path to do this physics thing and maybe with some kind of artsy part to it, aka architecture. But then when I got into architecture school, I realized that I didn't like the busy work aspects, and for other reasons, I was just like, I'm just going to go into engineering. And the engineering is structural engineering. I have a master's degree in structural engineering. Hope that answers your question.
No, definitely it does. I think you're Nigerian, right?
Correct. I am Nigerian, yes, born and raised, moved over here when I was almost 18 years old.
Now, typically Nigerians are very good at math. How is it possible that you did not really succeed in math?
Yeah, it was something that I had to figure out later on in life. I think there are 2 aspects. One aspect, the trivial part, is I have really bad eyesight, right?
Okay.
And you can't learn math by listening, right? So this was just kind of like this was a fact, right? I that especially in hindsight, right? Looking back, was like, okay, this was definitely a fact because most of the stuff I would listen and I would kind of summarize, right, and such and such. But math, you can't really do that, right? So I started falling behind and really wasn't engaged in that way. That's one aspect. The other aspect was most math teachers were not teaching math from an intuitive perspective. In other words, pretty much at least demonstrating to me that these mathematical algorithms are representations of curves, lines, surfaces, right? Which is a way that I prefer to go about imagining, right? So they never got to that imagination or intuitive aspect, right? it was just kind of hitting you with algebraic kind of stuff with a bunch of symbols that I had to see and kind of keep track of what, you know. So when I got into calculus, and then everything's, first of all, it was the bridge between math and physics, right? Isaac Newton coming up with calculus basically to solve a problem of rates of change, velocity and acceleration and such. Plus also it became very visual. I was always good at trigonometry, for example, right? I was good at trigonometry because trigonometry and geometry, right? Because they had a visual component to it. But when I got to calculus and realized, oh, everything has a visual component to it, right? This is all about surfaces, shapes, lines, curves, which are ways of representing a certain natural phenomenon. But most teachers in math don't do that. So basic summary is bad eyesight combined with a non-intuitive kind of approach until I got to calculus and saw the intuition of it all. And I kind of, yeah.
Okay. That sounds like a legitimate reason. I haven't heard that one before, but that does make a lot of sense.
The funny part is, like, I love the physics, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, it's not this kind of scientific reasoning. That was not the issue, apparently, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because again, the physics was tied to things that you could visualize, trajectories, this, that, the other, and then you could see the representations and the blah blah blah. So that was easy for me. But anyways, yeah.
No, definitely. In your line of work, what kind of skill sets do you value, or what is valued for, from a skill set perspective for the line of work that you do?
Perfect. So just to kind of give a little bit of context regarding like structural engineering, right? What does a structural engineer do basically, right? So utilizing, scientific and mathematical principles related to analyzing and designing force-resisting systems in buildings or any structure, right? So a structure could be an airplane, it could be a machine, it could be a bridge, right? But there are these things which we build, which serve a purpose, which is going to put stress on them. The stress could be through gravity or through acceleration or through certain other type, like, thermal expansion or wind or earthquake or whatever. Or wind shear forces on the wing of a plane. These things, though, these structures are supposed to maintain their shape and, blah, 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 right? So how do you analyze that and how do you design that? Point being, it doesn't matter if it's a plane or a bridge, a structure is a structure and the principles that govern it are the same. So that's kind of what the job is about, right? But generally speaking, I think that problem solving, right, which, if you have a little bit of imagination, it helps. Because if you don't want to just be a number cruncher, if you will, then you're going to find your niche or your specialty or bring the most value when you are able to solve certain particular problems. So imagination / problem solving, and then being able to listen and communicate, because there's an aspect which has to do with the sales entrepreneur, being a professional with your own shingle, your own kind of certification, 1099 stuff, which you need to have, good communication skills, if you will. But also because as a structural engineer, typically you are a liaison between different kind of interested parties in the construction project of any kind. There are other engineers, mechanical engineers or architects or the owner or this or that, all these different trades, mechanical contractors, electrical contractors, blah, blah, blah. And typically the structural engineer / civil engineer is kind of managing that whole process, because after all, they're kind of in charge of the whole structure coming together. And these other individuals are interested in different parts. But anyways, quick kind of summary to the question there is that imagination / problem solving and being able to listen, communicate, and develop those sales skills. I think those are important.
I don't know. Have you been looking at the news, I guess, the last few months, but there was a bridge in Baltimore and in Maryland that collapsed. And from a structural engineering standpoint, what's your take on a container ship crashing into the bridge and bringing it down in the capacity that it did?
Well, it was a disaster. Now, when you mentioned the take, I can't give you a well-studied take because I haven't gone and studied it well. If you said, okay, what kind of system was this bridge anyways, right? In terms of the way it was constructed, there are different ways to construct things, right? Different kinds of structural systems, right? You have like trusses or this or that. I'm not exactly sure what style it was. However, the overall principle is you can, everything, like you can build something that's completely invulnerable, let's say, invulnerable. But it'll be prohibitively expensive, right? So there's always, in other words, could you have a bridge whereby if a ship hits it, it wins and the ship loses? Yeah, 100%, right? Do you want to go building those kinds of bridges? No, it's crazy. It's better to have a system whereby ships don't hit bridges, right? But it makes sense that what happened to the bridge, because just to give a take, if you will. Again, I said I'm not studied on the particulars, but I've said generally speaking, there's always a cost benefit with regards to how expensive versus how safe, and then also it doesn't take much to really kind of unravel a structure. Beyond just breaking something, when you move it out of a certain orientation too much, right? There's a cascading effect of like, oh, well, that column was not supposed to deflect that much. There's generally kind of other redundant systems, but you can't have redundancies forever. And then you have this kind of cascading kind of thing happening. And some of these kinds of failures too can be rather explosive. Like if you imagine like concrete, when it breaks, it's not a nice soft kind of, it can be rather explosive, quick, and then the consequences kind of follow and such. But anyways, hope that answers your question.
No, definitely it does. It definitely does. I don't know all the particulars myself, but I figure you might have been paying attention to that. It's just a good segue into my next question. Regarding the current and emerging technologies, what piques your interest right now? Is it 3D printing, AI, augmented reality? Like, what is emerging right now that you see that is that piques your interest?
That is a good question. So I would say AI, right, from a couple of perspectives, insofar as they augment, or insofar as AI will augment with other aspects of things, which maybe I can put in a few buckets here. But first of all, just talk about AI in general, right? So GDP can grow, generally speaking, in one of three ways. You have population growth, you have growth in productivity, or you have growth in debt, right? Borrowing from the future, expanding, whatever, right? The growth in debt has not been happening because basically all the increase in debt has been to pay off the bills from the last debt, typically since like 2008, right? So yes, there's more and more debt, but it's just like more and more debt increasing to service the past debt. So we're not necessarily growing it with debt. Population growth, again, generally speaking, from a Western perspective, population growth is not that great, right? Some of Western countries and such are, below replacement levels, right, when it comes to population growth. And then all you have left is this productivity increase, right? So if we're to get out of this particular sinkhole we're in right now with regards to growth, and the symptoms of the sinkhole are everywhere in terms of, real wages not having increased for a while, blah, blah, blah. But in order to get out of this sinkhole, it seems like it's going to be a productivity growth, and AI seems to be the candidate right now, right? So the first aspect is, the obvious one of the, large language models and how they're going to augment and change certain industries, right? From accounting to finance to everything, and how they're going to kind of integrate with enterprises of that sort. Yeah, that's that general aspect. However, if you talk, for example, in the area of construction, you see, construction has been an industry, and this is the construction of all kinds of infrastructure. And by the way, the industry that I focus in is commercial and industrial clients. So think kind of like data centers, which is kind of like the hottest kind of area recently, but also petrochemical or other manufacturing and such, right? Construction has been resistant to automation because every project is kind of different, and the conditions, it's a completely different thing trying to build a factory that builds a car versus trying to automate the building of a building on site, right? The factory is a very well controlled environment whereby you can build something, but to show up at your piece of property, Mike, and erect a building in some kind of a automated AI way has been very difficult, right? So I see a lot of opportunity for AI to augment with that, and it's going to have to augment with robotics, right, in order to get that aspect done. So there's a large language model aspect, sure, we know that. But then there's this other aspect of the opportunities within construction, because it is lagged behind for decades for practical reasons, because it's construction, it's quite different from other things, right? And then there's also how it's going to augment with biotech, if you will, protein manipulation, which requires, we're using these models to figure out things which are difficult to understand with regards to being able to manipulate proteins to create, let's say, for example, artificial meat or whatever it may be. AI is also helping a lot in that area, and also material science. So generally, when it comes to the sciences, which are, in the realm of atoms, matter, right? The material science, great advances can and should come from there, and AI would help. Also in this area of the biosciences, if you will, being able to manipulate proteins and, pretty much, take a soup, if you will, of enzymes and create organic stuff out of it, of your choosing, right? AI will help with that. And then there's a construction aspect, and then also there's a large language model thing. And we understand that productivity seems to be the only escape hatch that we have right now. So AI.
I like it. I think that I'm in alignment with that as well. I think that that's definitely a pivotal technology that's going to be onboarded in the next 9 to 12 months if companies have now already adopted it. Segmenting away from the tech for a second. Well, at least staying in the realm of tech. Africa versus the West, right? What's your take on fourth industrialization on the continent and its impact?
Yeah, so there's so many directions one can go with it when it comes to Africa versus West, and then this fourth industrial revolution. However, the big word that can be used is opportunity, right? Opportunity with the attendant challenges in there. See, Africa, the emerging world or whatever, so it tends to be more chaotic, more wild, wild west. Hence, it's for the risky, if you will. However, there's an ability to skip steps, right? In other words, going straight from no real mass availability of telephones to the masses, skipping having to put in landlines to connect the people and just skipping straight to mobile, right? Is the kind of thing that you will see happening in the third world, whereby while the West or whomever is ahead goes through a series of steps to get to a particular place with regards to industrialization, if you will, there is an ability for the rest, if it's the West versus the rest, to kind of skip steps, right? Why do I put landlines? Boom, I go straight to this more efficient, highly more democratized and, distributive way of doing the telephone thing. Boom, I got that. Same thing with banking and mobile money, right? You have a mass of the unbanked, and then they skip the whole intermediate steps and just go straight to kind of mobile money, which is kind of big in Africa, which I know that you may have noticed that they do cell phone money more than we do over here, generally speaking, right? So I think that there's a lot of opportunities. Ability to skip steps gives you, therefore, this potential for exponential growth. So if you're someone that has an idea with regards to, because let me take one particular lane, for example, let's say adding value, to a particular product, raw material. It could be cocoa, it could be palm oil or something like that, right? So these represent low-hanging fruit out here in the wild, wild west, out here in Africa, if you will, out here in these emerging places, because you don't necessarily have to be at the tip of the sphere inventing the new AI way of augmenting with all these industries which you just discussed, right? That's one tip of the spear, the tip of innovation. But you could literally get exponential growth if you're able to figure out how to corner the canning of palm oil in West Africa, for example, right? Because that particular value add just isn't there yet, right? So you can grow the palm oil and you can do but there's minimal processing done. So if you can kind of step up a few levels of the processing beyond just the harvesting and the washing and shipping somewhere, right? So those low-hanging fruit, well-trodden paths, it's not like no one has ever canned something before, right? Represent massive opportunities, right? Which then, can be sources of capital for you to play in at the other end. I don't know whether it's, the cryptocurrency that's going to, do something with regards to, circumventing the euro dollar in Africa or something like that. Yeah, you could play it at that end too. So there's these two ends where in emerging markets, a lot of opportunity, a lot of risk, but there's low hanging fruit where if you figure that out, it's not rocket science that you have to figure out basically, right? Dangote basically is a billionaire from cement and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think that Africa is definitely in the right position to not make the same mistakes that westernized societies have made with traditional legacy technology. And so I think that they've eclipsed the West in some sorts as well, right? In terms of like you mentioned earlier, mobile money. We don't do that here. We have PayPal on the phone or maybe Cash App, but that's different from how they leverage mobile money. And so when you think about M-Pesa in Kenya and maybe some of the other World Remit as a platform to ship money around, I was in Kenya not too long ago this year, and nobody uses cash. That's something that's just completely unheard of in this day in 2024. That's unheard of. In the United States, people are still holding on to cash, hard cash, and so hard currency. And so, in some ways, the culture has kind of eclipsed that of the West. And then there's some areas, as that there's still a lot of infrastructure development that needs to happen. And so that's kind of where the challenges are. So the areas that they can leapfrog, as you were mentioning, they have done so, and have learned from a lot of the mistakes that the West has made. Segue into this next question is, do you think there can be a confluence between Pan-Africanism and the next generation of industrialization? Do you think that Africans and African Americans, those in the diaspora, can come together through next gen of industrialization, fourth industrialization, fifth industrialization, these emerging technologies, AI, fintech, blockchain, cloud? What's your take on that?
Yeah, very good question. I like it. So, if the trajectory, right? Let's say we're looking at this landscape of Pan-Africanism and then industrialization, and then there's a certain trajectory between here and there, wherever there may be. There is the goal, right? This trajectory will, I think, happen through regional integration first, right? It makes sense, right? Any kind of growth, right, has to be of that sort. Regional integration that solves common problems, right? So it could be kind of like geo type problems like rivers or other landed resources. In other words, within regions, okay? So before you talk about the entire, and also the diaspora and all that kind of stuff, but within regions, there's a lot of opportunities to solve common problems, which have to be solved regionally, right? Again, energy, value addition, raw materials, it could be even trade and finance, right? So out of that may come out certain regional norms, perhaps even currencies, trade deals and understandings, right? And those that will now also consolidate power. So let's say you have the diaspora now, right? And you are someone who understands, again, that this is the wild, wild west and it's a kind of a risky type of thing, but that's why people are there. That's why the Chinese are there. The wild, wild west is where you have exponential growth, right? So you can have East Africa that you could look at, right? Kenya and Ethiopia and such, Tanzania. You have West Africa. There's obviously the southern parts. There are these nodes which have problems on ground that need to be solved, and the solutions to these problems mean industrialization, value creation, money, right? And out of that comes, again, these norms and financial agreements and such, and currency possibly, things that start to look like, quote unquote, uniting, right? I think that there definitely is a confluence. This is if to the degree to which you can call me a Pan-African, this is the Pan-Africanism in which I believe. It's the Pan-Africanism of solving the goddamn problems on the ground. It's not like there are no problems, right? You have electricity issues in Nigeria, for example. It's like, okay, everybody needs to freaking have a generator and inverter and stuff like that. It's just kind of like, it's just taken for granted. Like, you're gonna need to supply yourself your own power and crap like that. Solving that problem, getting that copper and putting it in the ground and, forming all these other types of things. These things, right, are the things that form lasting alliances, I believe, from a regional perspective. And then these regions kind of consolidate power. And then you can talk about regional integrations and such, with the diaspora choosing to participate in any one of these playing fields that they choose to.
Yeah, that's interesting because I always considered myself to be a more an Nkrumahist, Kwame Nkrumah. And so Kwame Nkrumah believed that the unification of Africans on the continent and the diaspora under scientific socialism is the Pan-Africanism that was projected to be the the standard bearer of Pan-Africanism back in the 60s and 70s. And so, to your point, I think that Pan-Africanism can now be manifested in different aspects now, at least more than one, right? And so that economic piece is really key, right? That sort of socioeconomic development is another perspective.
Yeah, because if we go to another end, let's just call this particular end the political end of, let's say, what we call something like Pan-Africanism. If we go to the purely political end, you're going to hear all kinds of things about we must come together, or unity, or why we hitting each other, or those kinds of things, right? The social type of things. And I've always been of the one could call this materialist or structuralist or whatever it is. I think that it is what's going to make you and your neighbor get along and maybe see the fact that, hey, maybe we're all black, is if you guys decide to solve the problem of the little stream that cuts across you guys' property, and then you bring the water, I bring the this, and then we solve that problem, and then we live in peace, that kind of a thing. It's not by sitting there talking about how we need to love each other while everything around us is falling apart.
If everything falls apart, at least we got love, right?
Oh, good one.
In regards to like what it is that you do in terms of your day-to-day work, do you consider yourself passion driven or economically driven?
Definitely passion driven, with a complete understanding that the economic aspect is the tool. So it's one of those, I'm going to accept grudgingly the dichotomy, right? I'll say, okay, I'll grant you the dichotomy, because I don't necessarily see them as dichotomous necessarily, right? But to the degree to which you can have a dichotomy there between passion and economy, I'm passion driven first, right? For me, the zest for life, getting out there, taking on certain risks, doing things, going out to the limb, because that's where the fruit is and such, because after all, life is precious and great, is the main thing. And then I realized that I need economic freedom, if you will. I need some kind of way of remaining autonomous, because if you're going to be pursuing these things which you're passionate about and such, if you don't have some kind of autonomy, which tends to mean typically economic power somehow to be able to kind of maneuver your way through the world, it becomes a little bit more difficult. So I'm all about that grind. I'm all about that money. Okay. But it's because of the passion, basically.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I think that I would probably be doing the same thing from an IT perspective. Even if I was not in the industry, I would still be diddling and daddling in tech in some way or shape or form. I just wouldn't probably have the credentials to back it up, right? And so I think that going out and getting the academic credentials and kind of just pursuing that field is always that evolutionary step. And I think that I think that some of the guys and some of the people who say they're tech people but don't actually are not in the field, or say that they're engineering people, they're self-taught chemists and things like that, they're not in these areas. I think that you start to hit that glass ceiling that isn't necessarily created through social constructs, but due to the lack of due to the intellectual laziness, the lack of pursuit, if you will, of that area. And so I never wanted to be one of those guys. Like, before I got into IT, I was already, from a younger age, I was already working with like RC cars and different sort of electronics and stuff like that. So I was already putting these things together, soldering irons and whatnot. I still have my first oscilloscope in my closet, interestingly enough. And so these sort of things like push me to keep going to the next step. So I think I'm kind of in the same ballpark.
You know what? It's interesting because especially in tech, in your side of things, there is this one of my observations from afar has been that there has to be some kind of real engineer versus fake engineer snobbery that has to exist. Because I know, for example, if someone like yourself, you're talking about soldering irons and electrical engineering and stuff like that, and then you have coders, okay, and it must kind of be like you must wince a little bit when all these, they just call everybody the engineers, and this guy's a scripter. What does he know about electromagnetics of any kind, But anyways, is there such a thing do you have such a snobbery going on over there on your side of things?
I think there is. I think you do have people who, not so much from an engineering standpoint, but from a IT standpoint, sometimes you'll hear people say, I'm a developer or something like that. Okay, what have you developed? HTML. Okay, you just sit down over there and we don't need to have any further conversation. I think that happens, and I think it happens not out of pettiness, but it's like where the industry is now versus what you say you're doing. It's not aligning, right? It's not consistent. And so you're supposed to keep up with the emerging trends, so to speak. And so when you hear people say that they're developers or they're coders or something like that, but they can't articulate what language they're using or what their favorite language is or what language they got started off with, it starts to fall apart really immediately. One or two questions would usually expose them on how little they know about what it is they say that they're doing.
I agree.
Who has been your most significant influence from a technical perspective? Is there like a Nigerian or African version of a structural engineer or any sort of architects that you look up to that are African?
You know what? It's interesting. There hasn't really been any one singular individual. Now, in a particular category, let's say within the category of school, there have been a couple of calculus teachers, right? Let's say that were kind of like pivotal in the whole kind of, again, from a technical perspective, my kind of development, growth, inspiration, whatever, right? But remember I was talking about electromagnetics when I was young, right? So I think that basically it was Democritus and Maxwell and those dead old white men and their ideas that kind of piqued my interest when I was still a kid and could I memorized the definition of electromagnetic induction and I would repeat it. It was kind of like a little parlor trick, right, as a kid or something. So from then, it kind of branched off from there, if you will, to just kind of include many people, not necessarily with any kind of particular proximity via culture or in the family or Nigerian or such and such, right? It's just that I got my interest piqued by Maxwell's equations and electromagnetism when I was a kid, and it just kind of branched out from there. And there were definitely a couple of teachers, before. Anyways, I didn't necessarily give you the answer in terms of having a singular individual, but I don't think there was one.
So no Africans.
You see, no, not from a technical perspective, and that's not through any fault of theirs. Sure, there were many. There are people whom that I It's just that that's not where my eyes were, I guess. When I look back now, and also when I was growing up, there were kind of certain names. There's a guy called Chike Obi, for example, a mathematician, an Igbo mathematician in Nigeria. That was kind of like the guy, like, oh, like that was a name. So that is somebody that was like, oh, that's the guy to be in terms of math and whatnot and his achievements. So those do exist. Part of why I'm answering like this, I think really bears on the personality, on my personality. Because when people also ask me about mentors and stuff, I have difficulty kind of pointing out an individual in particular with, again, a certain kind of proximity. It's always a collection of ideas and the individuals behind them and such, right? Anyways.
Do you use, from a software perspective, you use any CAD programs that would help you with your day-to-day work?
Correct. Yeah. So Revit, AutoCAD, some SolidWorks, Navisworks, 3D, right? All those other kinds of things. Yes, 100%. So, and basically, it's all about communication, right? So you're going to communicate an idea between people on how to freaking build something. Typically, drawings are the kind of like the universal language in the world of building stuff, right? Whether it's IKEA or a building, right? So you can put it on a piece of paper, or and then you can use a computer help you draw it better on a piece of paper. And then maybe the computer can kind of do 3D and then 3D models, and you can fly through the space and you can make things kind of interactive and real and be able to pull real data from the model. And then you get into the augmented reality aspect where you're putting on a glasses and you're walking through the site and you're seeing the beams and the HVAC and all these other kinds of things. Yes, we play in that world.
Were you taught traditionally, or did they have you academically go straight into the programs, the software development programs?
So there was not a lot of software teaching, if you will, in school. Yes, you take this AutoCAD class. It's more like or less like an elective, or you take this other one called MicroStation, which is like another software, and you can kind of mess around. However, the bulk of the work is going to be on hands-on learning in your first job, and that tends to be a heavy part, a very true part of any kind of engineering, right? What you learn in school versus the modalities of practice are completely different. In school, they have to give you a nice theoretical framework and a lot of practicality. I went to Cal Poly Pomona, pretty good school when it comes to engineering, and that's because I think, they had a reputation to uphold and everything, and so that they got the good teachers and everything, but they had a particular philosophy which they followed, which involved a lot of learning by doing. So a lot of theoretical rigor, but there was always something at the end of the day that we're doing here, right? So we're not going to act like Stanford, the Stanford Structural Engineering program, and just, do all kinds of calculus all day, right? We're also going to build things, if you will. But anyways, I wandered far off from your question, but anyways, I'll shut up for now.
No. I think that some schools may try to teach traditional before they get to the digitalization aspect of it, right? And so I was always curious to know how some people learn, primarily because, like, from an IT perspective, right? My undergrad is in information system security, but what they did wrong, and I think many schools get this wrong, is that they teach Windows first before they teach Linux. So GUI versus command line. And I think that it's the ubiquity of Microsoft's footprint in the market that kind of maybe inadvertently forces them to do that. And I find that actually hurts a lot of students, because when you're very GUI oriented in the classroom, once you graduate and go into the real world, that command line becomes critical. and people they're not really accustomed to it, and you weren't really taught that, and so you have to unlearn a lot of what they teach in academia, to actually do your job and get acclimated with it. And I don't know if schools have caught on to maybe not doing that, but I definitely think that the teachings in the academy had to change at some point, or they should change. But they tend to teach you the practice can be a bit confusing after you graduate. In school, it's fine because it's lab sessions, but when you're trying to work in the real world in in some of the emerging parts, and you're in the field by yourself and there's nobody else around, that command line becomes very critical to you. And if you can't figure that out, you might be able to Google it now, but back in my day, in 04, 05, you couldn't really Google like that. You didn't really have 4G. You barely had 3G. 3G was a luxury back then. You didn't, and whatever type of phone you had, it wasn't guaranteed that you had an internet browser or anything like that. You didn't have Siri. iPhone wasn't a thing until a few years later. It was very critical back then to have that those sort of raw understandings of how to navigate the command line and how and what what to do when you're out alone in the field. And so we kind of was pushed out the window.
Interesting. This is quite interesting because if the line to be drawn here is a line that goes from more fundamental being more that command line thing, to more kind of surface level GUI interface type stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
You see, it's something that I've always kind of thought about with regards to also even my choice in going into what you may call the more mechanical side of engineering, right? The mechanical side of engineering, which basically involves the laws of thermodynamics and Newton's laws of motion. Mm-hmm. And what I'm getting at is basically it's about mastering about 6 equations. Now, these equations have many implications and such, but the laws of motion are not like infinite, right? If you understand F equals ma, mass equals force times acceleration, and the change in momentum, and also action and reaction, right? There's not much else going on mechanically. Now things get very complicated when you start spinning and doing this and blah, blah, blah. Oh yeah, sure. But it's not more equations, okay? It's just more complex or, and such, right? With feedbacks and blah, blah, blah. Same thing with the laws of thermodynamics. You have to do, the change in energy, basically all that stuff about energy cannot be created nor destroyed, but basically transformed from one form to the next, right? Or heat energy becomes this other kind of energy here, or what's the heat loss, what's this, that. So there's a set of equations there. So it's like 2 sets of equations of motion, and then these energy / basically energy and thermodynamic equations. So if you have these 4 things in your back pocket, it's easy. So basically I'm lazy, so I'm like, and I've always preferred more fundamental. In other words, more towards that end of fundamental principles, not too many of them, but if I understand this, then I can maneuver my way through many things. Similar to the whole kind of command line thing. Mm-hmm. So learning that in and also basically this particular, the mechanical engineering, if you will, structural engineering. I don't know if they've changed now to start maybe introducing more like, this software for analysis and this and that. But I that's not how I learned. And I think also the field itself lends itself to being that way, because it really is about understanding these freaking equations and taking those classes about it and stuff, right? Now, obviously, you could just go there and not learn the fundamentals, right? And then go out there in the world and be another one of the typical kind of perhaps 75% of the workforce that are just kind of button pushers, paper pushers, again lacking that quote unquote creativity and problem solving and imagination because they don't know what the fundamentals of any particular thing are. You could go that route, but that's why bother doing anything at all if you're not gonna really get down and busy.
Indeed. I wonder if AI would actually, generative AI would play a role in aiding, in some of those handicaps that some people may have. Like in regards to you had a little bit of a challenge with math. I had the same thing, I was the same way like you, but for different reasons. I'm a victim of the system. You're just a victim of the cataracts. And so I think that generative AI could kind of close that gap of where we see less of us in these sort of verticals in some of these industries and in these disciplines, to now seeing more of. And I think that generative AI will play a role in asking the right questions and the right prompts and getting the feedback that you need to kind of close the loop on some of the most challenging areas, such as the more mathematical areas that may be challenging to some in the undergrad sense. And so I imagine that instead of needing a 4-year degree, you might be able to skate by with just an associate's at the highest level, and start getting into things that you typically would not have gotten into 10 and 15 years ago. Maybe from an IT perspective, I'm looking at this, but from an engineering perspective, I think that may be something to look at.
100%. And even staying within the kind of like the realm of IT, the realm of let's just say programming, right?
Mm-hmm.
These large language models, are pretty good, and programming is a form of language, subset of language that is actually quite structured, right? So it's like perfect feeding ground to be able to use AI to augment human effort, right? Mm-hmm. So I definitely see, once how depending on how things develop, yes, a couple of years, a year and a half, whatever, and you learn, you become a good prompt engineer, right? I think that's the path forward, a path forward.
Yeah, it's a path forward, but I think what I'm saying here is that the prompt engineering aspect, or I shouldn't say the prompt engineering, but the generative AI aspect is going to say, I have this structure, because I was going back to the Francis Bridge in Maryland.
Uh-huh.
The CEO of AutoCAD came out and said that they have a generative AI platform that would allow that bridge to be developed through the software and actually help them build it on the, as they go along. Mm-hmm. And so whatever the cost initiative is, that ignoring all that, if we need to rebuild this bridge, what was there before, and put that data into and those models into the program, and then it will give you a newer version of what would be comparable to that bridge, so that it's either better structured or more cost effective or more robust than what it was before. And I was surprised to hear him say that. I don't know if it was just a stock pitch on Bloomberg, but it sounds to me like they've kind of figured this out in CAD. That
100%. Yeah, you see. So I mentioned that there was a great opportunity in the construction industry with regards to automation, generally speaking, right? Mm-hmm. Digitization and automation. Mm-hmm. However, if you look at certain aspects, I mentioned it's an opportunity because there's still a great amount of virgin ground, but you see, it has been mastered in certain aspects. There is the construction of ships, for example, which is very modular. Mm-hmm. Modularity is an important aspect here of this kind of automation, because it's like, you have these sections, and they're already kind of pre-manufactured, and you have bathrooms and this, and you just come in and you just form it like Voltron, right? Mm-hmm. That's the idea. Can I just come in and just form this bridge like Voltron? So in certain sectors where, you have more control of the environment, they have done that. Now, also in places where you have a lot of money, like petrochem world, with the crazy rigs and stuff out there, in the middle of the ocean and crap, right? Mm-hmm. They have also mastered and kind of utilized more of the cutting edge type stuff, right? So if you have a big bridge like this, government money, high, shall we say, visibility and such, yes, this is the kind of project where they can bust out the tools, which are there. There are ways of kind of automating the design and all these other types of things, and then going in there, and I would like to see how whatever. So robotics is also something that is, and I mentioned this before, like, because the robotics is going to be an important part of, like, putting it together. Forming this Voltron, it won't be that nice and awesome if it was guys with wrenches putting it together, right? Mm-hmm. So you see, I do sales for a company called Hilti, right? Mm-hmm. They're a German.
I've heard of them.
Yeah. Okay. So they have one robot out right now, and with more arms that will be added to it with regards to drilling holes and putting anchoring steel to concrete basically and stuff like that, such that a lot of overhead work, that kind of thing. And there are more coming in, plus also human augmentation stuff, right? Think of like at some point there'll be like a construction suit, right, that you put on, and it's got it's all this kind of Iron Man capabilities, blah blah blah.
Or exoskeleton.
Exactly, right. That kind of a thing. There are already a couple of what I would consider primitive versions of it out right now, right? But there's a lot of shall we say development and research going in that direction.
Okay. Yeah, I think the military has kind of, played around with that Iron Man suit. I know the British have a suit that actually allows you to fly around. I haven't seen Americans really do that, but I wouldn't imagine that they're too far behind. And so this would definitely be interesting if we keep that on the radar. Finally, what advice would you give to a person from the diaspora to getting into your industry? What advice would you give them?
So I'll put it this way. I would say move towards the risk, right? And what does that mean? How do we contextualize that, right? Moving towards risk, for example, could mean within your career, moving towards more pay for performance type arrangements, right? When you move towards risk, you're inevitably moving towards the money. You're moving closer to the spigot of where the money is. So let's say, for example, find ways to, rather than just be a tool, some kind of engineering tool like a light bulb or some software or some button pusher, try to move closer to the place where the money comes from in whatever organization you're in, right? To be able to be part of the influencing of money coming in, right? Point being, right? And basically I'm saying move towards sales. That's one aspect of it. I move towards being able to sell that. Now, another aspect is moving towards risk means getting that certification and moving towards more of a 1099. It's okay to have a W-2, fine, right? I believe in once you open a particular stream, don't close it. Find a way to open another stream and make all of them work together, right? So I have no problems with W-2s. However, start moving towards that 1099. It's more risky, more versatile, right? By versatile, I mean volatile, right? It's not like a steady paycheck, if you will. But in there, you're literally next to the money, right? Because now you're this particular individual practitioner. And when you go and get your engineering degree, get your license. If you're a structural engineer like myself, get your professional engineer license, right? There's no point in wasting all your time getting that degree and putting yourself through all those calculus classes and almost getting a minor in math, right? Just to then be like, oh, I'm just going to be a cog in the machinery. I'm not going to kind of have my independence. So get your license, and that involves working with a professional engineer license, a licensed professional engineer under them in some capacity, right? In a company where they're there, such that they can sign that you have the required 2-year experience, write the exams, get that certification, start moving towards the 1099, which is another way of moving towards the risk, which is another way of kind of creating your independence and getting more money. So, and if there are, for whatever reason, so we say, okay, maybe there's social reasons, right? Like you mentioned, being a victim of the system, right? Maybe if there are any kind of socioeconomic impediments towards you climbing, if you will, right? Moving towards the money is a great way of solving that problem, right? Now, first of all, you got to deal with the emotional part where you're like, okay, you're going to put discipline over self-esteem or whatever, blah, blah, blah. If you need therapy, go to therapy or go to church or whatever, right? That's not what we're talking about here. But when you actually move towards the money, move towards the risk, right? If you are now this very great sales engineer, it doesn't matter if the boss doesn't quote unquote like you, right? You have a say. You have leverage, right? If you become, if you're the best, structural engineer, through your 1099 service or whatever, you give your clients great service. It doesn't matter if the Chinese guy building the TSMC project, right, in Arizona, which I kind of participated in, by the way. It doesn't matter if they don't like you or not. Okay, you're a great engineer, and you're right there in the game because you've moved towards the risk to get that certification to be right there to, offer people service. Then that question of the impediments, social impediments to whatever climbing you need to do, gets solved simultaneously by this problem. The money problem gets solved by this. The social problem gets solved by this. Move towards the risk.
Excellent advice and a great way to end it. Ike, I really appreciate you coming on and dropping your knowledge and having this discussion with me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I appreciate you having me. Always good times, Mike V. And thank you.
We should do this again on your channel.
Yeah, we definitely should.
Absolutely. Have a good one. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
And to everyone else, please hit the like button on the way out, share the video if possible, and hit that notification bell so you get all the updates from the Black Brain Trust.